about this nuclear deal with Iran. A vote is coming probably sometime next week in Congress, and it would appear as though a majority of congressmen, both in Congress, in the House and the Senate, are going to vote to reject the deal. However, it will be veto-proof. Tonight there's going to be a town hall meeting on the campus of Villanova University. Former Congressman Joe Sestak, who represented the 7th Congressional District, and a former candidate for the U.S. Senate, who is a candidate again for the U.S. Senate, is going to be talking about this deal. 31 years in the Navy, also 4 years in Congress as representative of the 7th District, and he knows something as both a member of the Armed Services and Education and Labor Committee, and also as the highest-ranking former military officer to serve in the U.S. Congress. Joe Sestak joins us right now. And Admiral, thanks for coming on.
Darryl, thanks for having me back. Thank you. It
is good to have you on again, and I'm anxious to hear some of your insight on the Iran deal. I've said before on the program that it makes me awfully nervous to enter into an agreement with these folks. Iran being I think it's generally accepted the largest state sponsor of terrorism in the world, and enter into a deal with them seems counterintuitive right at the beginning. So we'll dig into that a little bit, but I want to get your take on a few other things. You are an announced candidate for the U.S. Senate. You're going to have a primary. Katie McGinty, former gubernatorial candidate, running in the Democratic primary to run against Pat Toomey, who I understand, I just found out he is announcing this Sunday, is officially launching his re-election bid. You ran against Toomey when he ran the first time, and you're running against him again. What over the last 6 years has concerned you most about the senator from Pennsylvania?
Well, most of what he concerns me about Pat Toomey is that he'll say something here in Pennsylvania, but he'll vote a totally different way down in Washington, D.C. So, for example, he said that he was very concerned about the suicide rate of our veterans, that it's high, and that he was concerned, and he said it was counterintuitive, used the same word you did, of a high unemployment rate for our vets coming home. And yet there was 2 standalone bills, one, a mental health bill a couple years ago to take care of our vets coming home with more PTSD than other wars have had in order to take care of them, and he voted against it. He also voted against the standalone jobs bill, which was bipartisan, by the way, on it. In fact, he voted to send me to war as a congressman. He came aboard my aircraft carriers. We were bombing away in Iraq. And then he came home and voted against every single Veterans Appropriations bill as a congressman and as a senator up till December. Now, he's done that on transportation, the same thing. In fact, he was in Erie and said we need a long-term transportation bill. Then he led the filibuster, and he went before the Tea Party, Darryl, in Washington, D.C., and said the words that a journalist copied down. We did something constructive today. I told you we'd kill it, and we did. I just think you need to be consistent from what you say here and how you vote down there.
What about the campaign that you're going to have to wage against Katie McGinty? What is your opinion of your primary opponent?
My focus is solely, like I did that 422-mile walk, Darryl, when I held up my combat boots that I wore on the ground in Afghanistan, because I headed the Navy's anti-terrorism unit. And in front of Independence Hall, I said, the Constitution was signed here, and it began with the words, we the people. And I am going to walk 422 miles in the shoes of others, starting with my fellow vets, until I go from the New Jersey to the Ohio border. It's about them. And then I'm going to make sure that there is, as you pointed out, a clear choice between Senator Toomey and me. And there is a difference. I really do want to walk in the shoes of veterans, in the shoes of seniors, in the shoes of our small business people, which have too much regulation on them. It costs 40% more for a small business to take care of regulation than it does for a large corporation. Mm-hmm. And that's what I want to do, is focus on them. And that's what I don't think Senator Toomey or others are doing. But that's going to be my real focus, whether it's a primary or a general.
All right. Well, we'll have an opportunity to talk about all of that later. You've got
be great.
You've got an event tonight again at Villanova, and I guess you're being sponsored by the ROTC
yes.
at Villanova to give this town meeting. I'm supposing the public is invited tonight?
Absolutely. I think too few elected officials hold open forums. Mm-hmm. I used to love the town halls for health care. I must have held about 10 to 15 of them.
7 to 9 p.m. at Driscoll Hall in the auditorium, room 132, just off the lobby. And that's at 800 Lancaster Avenue in Villanova, if you want to head down there. Talk to me about your overall feelings. Again, there's so much trepidation, I think, and I think it's valid trepidation when you enter into an agreement with a government like Iran.
Yes, and you're right, Darryl. Absolutely right. I am a cautious supporter of this accord. The primary reason is that we know, as you do, that 30 days from today, Iran can have enough bomb-grade material for a nuclear weapon, actually several. In 1 month, they can do that from today. We know that this accord will dilute that uranium so far down that it will take them a year to spin it back up by centrifuges to get to the level they are today. And the centrifuges that are going to be used, as you probably know, or anybody that does know anything about centrifuges, and I was on a nuclear aircraft carrier, so I've got some exposure to nuclear business, is that they're placed in storage, and centrifuges decay while they're in storage. So it's actually probably going to be longer than a year. Now, do I trust the Iranians? No, absolutely not. I mean, even President Reagan, I would have been more harder than he was with the Soviet Union, where he said trust by verify. I'd say verify before you trust. But we cannot take the military option off the table. But the military option will still be there. If they cheat, like the Soviets did under Ronald Reagan, he pounded them back in. But we never forgot our military was there to do us justice in our security. So that's the first and foremost reason I'm a cautious supporter of this treaty, of this agreement.
What about the 24-day window here, where instead of just charging in, and again, apparently U.S. inspectors are excluded in this deal, but the people that can go in and monitor this stuff are going to have to give 24 days notice. Yes.
Any facility today that we know or suspect has anything to do with nuclear weaponry making is an instantaneous inspection. Those are the known ones, or the ones we suspect. Now, you talk about the 24-day ones. Yeah. If all of a sudden we suspect that the president of Iran or the Ayatollah of Iran is starting to make some nuclear bomb material in their basement, we say, hey, we suspect it. They say, where's the evidence? Because, we could just run nilly-willy around the country. We present it. They reclaim it if they want to. But within 24 days, we have the right to go in there because we've set it up that it's only the Western powers that negotiated the deal. Not China, not Russia, not Iran, have the majority vote, and in we go. And so that's what happens. And again, as you well know, if there's beta, gamma, or if there's alpha radiation, that stuff does not erase for years. So it's not like all of a sudden they're doing something with nukes and they pick up this nuclear material and run out. You can't, because of the gamma, the beta, and the alpha, do away with that, even if it took us a couple months. But we've got a surety that we can go in if that Ayatollah is doing something in his basement.
It's interesting because we had Bob Casey on last week, and Casey announced that he was going to vote to support the deal after studying it extensively. And I acknowledge then, as I acknowledge now, both of you are much smarter than I am and have looked at this issue much more closely than I have. My concern would be that apparently there are secret aspects to this deal, which I guess is not altogether unusual. There are some aspects of this deal that we really we don't even know about.
Well, the only one I know about that people have been talking of is something separate, where the International Atomic Energy Agency has for a couple of years had a deadline by this coming, I think it's now the deadline, this coming December, to go in because they're the inspectors and find out the past activity that Iran has done. It's basically going into the history books to try to find out what they have done. Now, that accord isn't open, okay? But we know that they're going to go in, and they're the ones, by the way, who reported that Iran was cheating before. They're pretty tough. They do the same thing with North Korea. They're the ones that reported and found that North Korea was cheating. So they're going to go in and try to find out from soil samples and things like that, what's their past history? Because, you like to know where people come from. But our own intelligence agency, the CIA, says, that's okay. It isn't going to help us to monitor this situation. But here's the overarching thing, Darryl. I've operated out there. I've been through the war plans. In fact, I did a study with 20 retired Navy generals and admirals, national security officials 2.5 years ago as this was all being negotiated. We cannot find, and we will use I'm so supportive of using the military to stop Iran from having a nuclear weapon if we must. But when we do this strike, understand the cost and the benefits, because we can't find their submarines. They've got 19 midget submarines, and if you've operated there with our sonar in the Persian Gulf, it's so shallow that our sonar reverberates, we can't find any submarines. And they also got 4 kilos, so we will withdraw battle groups out of the Persian Gulf. As their fishing vessels drop thousands of mines, we've watched them practice it. And 1/5 of the world's oil goes through that strait. Now, when we begin our strikes from its safe distance, and probably the Arab nations may not let our Air Force use bases there, so it'll be the Navy. As our carriers begin the strike, hundreds of missiles and rockets will rain down on our ships if we're close enough, but also on our troops in Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, and Israel. So we got to destroy those things right away. And then to do that, we've got to first destroy the surface-to-air missiles that the Russians have given them. This isn't Iraq. They've got a much better surface-to-air system. Yeah. So this strike will take weeks, if not months. And once we go all egress in, finally after beating all that stuff down so that our own other countries aren't destroyed, and then we got to start clearing the mines, which will take months, then we begin the strikes. And the strikes can only stop their nuclear program for 4 years because Fordo is under 300 feet of rock. So will we do that if we must? Yes, but understand that it's going to make the aftermath of Iraq look like a cakewalk. This is the different scenario. Do it if we must. But militaries, when you use us, make sure that you have your need to use us. And I think that's another reason why we have to say, can we make this work? Is the inspection regime tough enough to make sure we can catch them? And the answer is a heck of a lot tougher than it was for North Korea. This is the toughest one that's ever been negotiated, even with the Soviet Union.
Well, I guess where I wanted to go was when I brought up Bob Casey's name, because he mentioned, as you did a couple of moments ago, the negotiations between the Soviets and Ronald Reagan. And it seems in retrospect that in some ways, we were much more like the Soviets with more mutual interests than we are the Iranians, and depending on the level of concern you have about what the leaders actually believe about the coming of the next imam or whatever, they may not mind their own destruction all that much. So it seems in retrospect we had much more in common with the Soviets when we were negotiating with them than we do with the Iranians when we're negotiating with them.
It's an interesting viewpoint, Darryl. I remember when Khrushchev came from the Soviet Union to the United Nations and took his shoe off and pounded the podium there and said, "We will bury you, America." That's kind of like the Ayatollah saying death to America. So I wasn't so enamored with the Soviet Union. But that said, I asked the general.
I wasn't enamored with them. I was just pointing out that in retrospect we may have had more in common.
I shouldn't have said that.
Right.
But
yes.
You're absolutely no. I have a great respect for you. I know. But here's the issue.
Right.
I operated out there in the Persian Gulf, and I got to tell you something. The Iranian regular Navy would go past me. They'd call up and say, "Coming down 500 yards on your starboard side." Very professional. But the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, I kept 2 helicopters up 24 hours a day because in the middle of the night they come streaming towards us on a cigarette boat. And, of course, we had rules of engagement. We warn them, we flash lights, the helicopters would start using the blades to wash them away and ready to take them with guns, and they turn away at the last minute. There's an element there that is exactly what you say. But I asked the general when I was a congressman, my first year of Afghanistan, I said, is there any common interest with the Iranians? He said, you bet there is. They hate Al-Qaeda. Now, today, they hate ISIS. Sunni Shia. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't want instability in Afghanistan. And I think that, in the longer term, we found some common interests, like stay with the Soviet Union. I'm not saying this is going to be any marriage at all, because, gosh darn it, we have to double down about their extension into terrorism that they're going to try to do or are doing. But note here that right now we're both fighting ISIS.
Yeah. What is, and you referenced this as well a couple of moments ago, we look at Iran as a separate country, and it obviously is, but they have very close ties to the Russians. Yeah. And there's an allegiance there between those two.
Yes. Look, Russia gave them a heck of a lot of the scientific work and material to build this, so you're spot on. And, that's why those who say, well, we're going to apply more crippling sanctions to bring them to their knees, I scratch my head and say, Russia? Are you kidding? They were already selling them more SA-3s. You might have seen the missile systems here a couple weeks ago. And China and even the European Union, they're going to walk away. And then you might even, if Iran gets a nuclear weapon, we'll have to strike, okay? Mm-hmm. But even if we didn't, Pakistan has been given tens of billions of dollars by Saudi Arabia to help it over the years, because the deal is, under the table, Iran gets a nuke, Saudi Arabia has Pakistan build them a nuke. Darryl, can I take one more moment here and tell you something additional about Russia?
Sure.
Darryl, this is what, I'm a big believer the military has to be on the table, but the back of the table.
Mm-hmm.
I watched about 4 years ago, the Bush administration had a proposal, which was sensible, to put in the Czech Republic and in Poland to build a ground-based ballistic missile defense system that could protect America by the end of this decade if Iran ever got a ballistic missiles that could reach America or Europe.
Mm-hmm.
President Obama closed that down. Now, the quid pro quo with Russia was, hey, look, you don't like this system because you think it's against you when it's really against Iran. I'll tell you what, I'll take the stick out of the eye of the bear, the Soviet Union, Russia, and now you pivot, Russia, and apply sanctions on Iran. That was the quid pro quo. After we closed that system down that was being built, Russia applied sanctions, but here's what few people know. What the president did then is upgraded our Aegis ballistic missile systems on our ships out there. And by the end of this decade, and I've gone through the classified and the unclassified studies, we will have the same capability to protect America from intercontinental ballistic missiles, all of Europe, and in addition, Israel, which was not being protected from ballistic missiles. In short, by using hard diplomacy and military as a backup system, we shut something down. Russia applied sanctions, of which it wouldn't have been successful without, and we have ballistic missile defense system that now protects Israel as well as us. I think that's the kind of work at times people don't see. And if people want to play whack-a-mole too quickly with our military, like in Iraq, I would say, hey, wait a moment here. Let's see if this can't work first. Because at the end of the day, it's us that go there, the people in the military, and we're ready to do it. But not to give this to see if it works, I think would be wrong.
Because of the closeness of Iran and Russia, does Iran do anything without Russia's okay?
Yeah, I don't think Russia's all in the loop on some of the terrorists that goes on, because Russia has its own terrorist problems with Muslims and those of the Islamic faith in its former southern republics.
Yeah.
So, to me, Russia likes Iran primarily because it buys its hardware for the military. That's the primary reason. And it can provide pipelines for oils and things like that. I don't see them as being partners in arms except for money. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I'm almost, and I don't want to appear as though I'm enamored by the former Soviet and Russia or Putin, for Pete's sakes, but it almost seems like there's a moderating quality about that relationship that they have with Iran.
Well, that's interesting, Darryl. I've heard some others have actually said that, and that was part of, this negotiations that was going under the table. And, you know how it is when you do something like closing down a missile system that Russia wants closed. You don't exactly, Russia did not want anything in the public, about why they were then pivoting to apply sanctions. But the proof was in the pudding is they did moderate. They helped bring Iran to the table. Look, sanctions can hurt, but sanctions don't always work. Look at North Korea. People say more crippling sanctions. I don't think you can do any more sanctions than what we're doing over there. I mean, over there, there's famines and everything, and so sanctions don't always bring you to the table. This time it did, because they had a middle class, which North Korea never did. And I think the restiveness finally brought them to the table.
Is there any way to clamp down on, and Senator Casey pointed out, probably rightfully, that it doesn't take a lot of money or a lot of financial support to help finance some of these terrorist networks that Iran is in bed with.
Yeah.
So the fact that it is getting, and it will realize, and there's all sorts of estimates, it's either $50 billion or $150 billion or however many $billion it realizes by the sanctions being lifted, that doesn't necessarily have a dollar-for-dollar impact on the amount of terrorism that will be financing around the world.
Yeah, Darryl, you first of all, I appreciate that you say the estimates vary from 50 to 150 and all that, billions, because there are varying statements from our government and from those not in the government. That said, this economist estimate for the repair of the Iranian economy is about $500 billion, $500 billion. So there's not a question, most of all, that this money will probably go into the economy. In fact, you probably have read the reports that there's already VIP suites being opened up at the airport in Iran for Westerners to start some trading. That said, this point that you're bringing up, that some of this very well may trickle into or be put into terrorists, this brings to the fore the biggest issue that I think people don't understand at times, in government even, that the Treasury Department, in conjunction with all the Treasury Departments and the banks of the world, are probably first and foremost on the lines of anti-terror. Take ISIS. After they took over Iraq, they had $400 million. They were the richest terrorist group in the world. Mm-hmm. And strangling that, you can't just move $400 million through bazaars. You've got to use the banking system. Right. And so that is what we have to do, is strangle them better than we're doing today. And to do that, this is why you can't just say more crippling sanctions. You've got to have the agreement of Russia, certainly China and others. And so this is pretty hard. I mean, it's hard enough to get Democrats and Republicans to even talk to one another. Yeah. And so when you're bringing these nations together, I think this is one of those times where credit hasn't been done well enough to say, how did you ever get Russia, China, and the European Union all to agree that there'd be sanctions? And so, and if you want to shut down on this money, you need them also. And that's the challenge in the global war of terror.
And Congressman Fitzpatrick is sitting on a special task force looking into terrorist organization financing. They've held some meetings. I think there may be one today, actually. I've got something from his office, but it's something we've talked to him about, and obviously this is part of that equation as you look at the overall issue involving Iran and how it funds terrorist groups and that sort of thing.
You're right. And by the way, I've enjoyed my conversation with the congressman from the first time I met him out of the dedication of the Bucks County new Veterans Affairs Veterans Memorial. I've enjoyed my conversations with him very much. Look, this issue you bring up is very important. Militaries can stop a problem. We just can't fix a problem. Look at Iraq today. We didn't fix it. And look at even Nazi Germany. It took the Marshall Plan to finally really fix it. So, and whoever thought, here they're doing the Holocaust. Whoever thought back then that maybe Germany could be a normal nation again? Well, it did. And so, as I heard another congressman say, maybe Iran eventually can if Germany could. I'm not saying they can or can't yet. We got to watch. But my take is that this terror approach of ours, people think it's just about the military. It's Treasury Department. It's fixing the illiteracy rate of women in Afghanistan. 98% of when we went in there, and I went in early, just for a short mission, nothing like the Marines and the Army, Darryl, nothing like that, just very short. But it was 98% illiteracy rate. Of course you're going to find a hotbed there for terrorists to be welcomed, in a sense, when you have such a high literacy rate of women. There's things that are done to win this global war terror that isn't just the military. Now, do you need the military? Absolutely. You couldn't have gotten bin Laden without it. But my take is it's a multi-pronged approach, and I'm not sure our National Security Agency is really interagency set up as well as it should, and nor do I think we have enough people in the Senate and other places who understand military policy and the nexus of it with foreign policy.
Before we let you go, a couple of political questions, one directly dealing with the Iran deal, because it appears as though all Republicans in both the House and Senate, and some Democrats in both houses, will vote in opposition to it.
Yes.
A majority, it appears, will vote in opposition to it. Not a veto-proof majority, but a majority. What kind of message does that send, do you think?
Well, to me, and again, it's kind of what I just said at the end of my last sentence. I'm a little disappointed in the deficit of military experience, foreign policy experience, that is in today's senators of both parties. I mean, who served? I think it's one or a couple. I mean, who is the Sam Nunn of old, that you used to have, where General Powell, when I worked for him on the Joint Staff, used to go across and discuss the new strategy that we would have, and actually took ideas from Sam Nunn, who chair of the Armed Services Committee, on the new strategy of the Soviet Union place. There are people that don't even get it, and that letter to the Ayatollah by the 47 senators, Senator Toomey and others, that said, hey, disregard our presidency. You're going to have to deal with us. I think at times that not only is there a deficit of military and foreign policy experience, but at times we've now unfortunately let partisanship go beyond the water's edge. Disagree here, but never over there.
We have an election coming up in November, and we've got county races, and we've got local municipal races. Your election, if you're successful in the primary, would be against Pat Toomey next year. During the presidential year, you served as an advisor to Bill Clinton. What is your take on the campaign of Hillary Clinton, which seems to be struggling so much?
Yeah, I supported then Mrs. Clinton, now Secretary Clinton, in the last race in the primary. I had worked with her in the White House when I was Director of Defense Policy. You mentioned she helped me when I couldn't get Agent Orange expanded in terms of eligibility. She hosted a tea where the VA Secretary came over, and Admiral Zumwalt, who had voted to use Agent Orange in Vietnam, and his own son later died of Agent Orange, used to come to see me because I had this part of my responsibilities, and she helped move the issue just by holding the tea and asking questions, and suddenly we were able to move it and helped establish a women's veteran. So I was so very supportive of her, but I have said that and I said this 2 months ago on television, or a couple months ago, the biggest deficit in America today, and that's how my new book starts, by the way, Walking in Your Shoes to Restore the American Dream. It says the biggest deficit in America today is the trust deficit. And more than anything else, I want to be part of the team that maybe, like a captain of a ship, people would trust again because don't hold themselves above accountability. So I believe that the more transparent, just to say, hey, look, here's what happened. I was right or wrong. Just say it. Open it up. Be transparent. Talk about it. And, mistake was made, admit it. This is what I believe. Like you asked that first question of me, of Senator Toomey, where he says Alzheimer's is such a bad issue. We've got to address it. Then he votes against the increase, and we need more money for it. He votes against the bipartisan increase that passed for Alzheimer's research. In my mind, accountability is what's missing today, and my best advice is just, okay, if something was wrong, admit it, be held accountable for it. The nation, I believe, wants that more than anything.
She's issued an apology now, and I guess she wants to move beyond the issue, I suppose. I suppose she wants to get it in a rear-view mirror at some point, but not easily done.
They said a couple months ago that's what we should do this.
Yeah. So are you hoping that Joe Biden gets into the race, or like Bernie Sanders, or what's Joe Sestak?
Well, here's how I feel.
Yeah.
And I got asked to run against Senator Specter when he was a Republican a couple times, and I said no, and then I said yes. and then center spec switch parties, and they told me no longer on Dan's card.
Right. Yes.
I said, well, let me go to 67 County and figure this out. In other words, anybody who gets in should get in. I like Joe Biden. Here's why. After I beat Senator Specter, against the whole party establishment, pretty much how I'm running now, you've probably heard. The Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, as you probably know, really kind of wants to control a candidate and went through 7 people before they found one.
Yeah.
Because I'm not their guy if they want to control them for people. But Joe Biden called me after I beat Senator Specter. And he said, hey, Joe, congratulations. If I can help you, I want you to call me. Call me, will you? About a week later, he called back. He said, hey, this is Joe.
There you go.
He goes, I had told you to call me. You didn't. I mean, what politician acts? Most of them just throw something out there. But how many come back and say, I'm serious, I want to help you? And he did. He came in, did some stuff for us, events and all. But so, yeah, I like Joe. I ran in the Pittsburgh parade. I left at 3 a.m. I shook every hand. And at the end of the parade, I found out he was the only other politician that shook everybody's hand. I wondered why the parade was going slow.
Yeah, there was an interview. I forget which the Sunday programs he was on, but a Harvard professor is now running for the Democratic nomination for president, who was talking about reforming our system, and one of the things he talked about is the ridiculous congressional gerrymandering that is going on in this country. You represented the 7th Congressional District. I have no problem with the 7th District. The radio station, because of the latest redistricting, now sits in the 7th District here in Towamencin Township in Montgomery County, and this district borders Maryland and Delaware. And to me, it's an example. I don't know if there are worse gerrymandered districts in the country. I guess there are.
They called it probably the worst after they did it. But,
but this is the worst in Pennsylvania, no doubt about that.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, there's no doubt this is the worst in Pennsylvania.
Oh, it is the worst. But I got to tell you, both Democrats and Republicans are both guilty of this.
Well,
and this is where the parties have let us down. That's why I tell people, look, I'm an independent who happens to be a Democrat. And I was independent for 31 years in the Navy. But, it's not about party. It's not about type. It's about people. And this gerrymandering is something. And that's why you brought up the judicial branch a little earlier, Darryl. I think people neglect our judicial branch to our peril. Because eventually everything goes to the judicial branch, even gerrymandering, like here in Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Affordable Care Act, even the election of president goes to the judicial branch. And so I put an email out the other day in support, saying, really look at these judicial candidates, because eventually our character seems to be being shaped by our judicial branch more than any other branch, because eventually everything goes there.
Yeah, there was a challenge in court in Pennsylvania about the reapportionment, which is for the state legislature, which to me, although there are some examples of gerrymandering there, it wasn't as egregious as the redistricting for Congress. But anyway, that's another issue I know.
But this gets to the whole thing about, when I go around, and I went to teach, Darryl, after I didn't win. I mean, I turned down those 7-figure jobs for lobbying that 430 members in Congress had got. I went to teach at, I loved it, from everything from Carnegie Mellon to Cheney University, Penn State. I went there because I really wanted to try to better understand, particularly with our national treasure, our youth, what's going on? Why do people have felt as though our established parties, established leaders in other civil parts of our society have lost their way? And this is a real concern. I'd love to be part of the generation that starts instilling interest again in the new generation that's coming forward. Because I got to tell you, this issue of not trusting, I don't care if it's parties or government, that's got to go.
And therefore Trump, and therefore Sanders. I mean,
absolutely this is right. I tell people, Trump and Sanders are both mined into a vein that they're against. It's not about the party; it's about people and policy. I'll say it like it is.
All right. Well, Joe Sestak, I appreciate the time today. 7 to 9 tonight is the time for the event, the town meeting that Joe Sestak will be conducting and speaking at Villanova University at the Driscoll Hall Auditorium right on Lancaster Avenue. Thanks so much for coming on, and I hope we get to talk again before too long.
I'd love to, and thank you, Darryl, very much.
Absolutely. Joe Sestak joining us